He has money, he has status, he has options, women are interested, people admire him, society calls him a catch. So why is he still single? Because what looks powerful on the outside can be deeply disconnected on the inside. Let's talk about it. Success doesn't equal emotional intelligence. The world often confuses competence with consciousness. Just because someone knows how to build wealth, manage teams, negotiate contracts, or dominate competitive environments does not mean they understand their own emotions, let alone someone else's. Professional success is built on logic, strategy, and measurable outcomes. Emotional intelligence is built on self-awareness, empathy, regulation, and the ability to sit with discomfort. These are entirely different muscles. One can be highly disciplined, extremely focused, and mentally sharp in business while being emotionally reactive, avoidant, or disconnected in relationships. Achievement trains the mind to prioritize results. Emotional intelligence requires understanding process. In the professional world, if something doesn't work, you pivot, optimize, replace, or eliminate it. In relationships, you cannot optimize feelings or replace human vulnerability with performance. Many high achievers become exceptional at controlling external environments, but emotional intelligence demands internal regulation. It requires noticing triggers instead of projecting them. It requires listening to understand, not listening to respond. It requires accountability instead of defensiveness. None of these skills are guaranteed simply because someone has status. Success can even mask emotional immaturity. When someone is constantly validated for their performance, they rarely have to confront their blind spots. Money can create comfort, status can create admiration, but neither forces self-reflection. Emotional intelligence develops when a person examines their fears, insecurities, attachment patterns, and coping mechanisms. It grows when someone learns to communicate without dominance, to disagree without disrespect, and to experience vulnerability without perceiving it as weakness. These are inner developments, not external milestones. There are individuals who can read markets but cannot read emotional cues. They can calculate risk in investments but struggle to navigate emotional risk in intimacy. They understand leverage in business but misuse power in relationships. Emotional intelligence is not about IQ, nor is it about how many people follow or respect you. It is about emotional regulation under stress, the ability to create psychological safety, and the capacity to hold space for another person's feelings without feeling threatened or diminished. Power can hide emotional unavailability because authority often creates distance. When someone holds influence, status, or control, people naturally adjust around them. They become agreeable, accommodating, careful. That dynamic can make it easy to avoid emotional depth without ever being challenged. Power allows someone to set the tone, define the rules, and maintain the upper hand in most interactions. But emotional intimacy requires equality, not hierarchy. It requires openness, not control. When a person is used to being deferred to, admired, or even slightly feared, they may never have to confront how uncomfortable vulnerability feels to them. Power also provides distraction, a demanding career, leadership responsibilities, constant decision-making. These can all serve as socially acceptable shields. Being busy becomes a justification for emotional distance. Being focused becomes an excuse for not engaging deeply. From the outside, it looks like ambition and drive. Internally, it can be avoidance. Emotional availability requires slowing down long enough to recognize one's own fears, insecurities, and attachment patterns. But when someone's identity is reinforced by productivity and control, stillness can feel threatening. Silence can bring awareness, and awareness can expose emotional gaps. There is also the ego component of power. When someone is consistently validated for their strength, competence, and authority, they may begin to associate vulnerability with weakness. Admitting confusion, expressing emotional needs, or acknowledging hurt can feel like a loss of dominance. So instead, emotions are intellectualized, minimized, or redirected. Conversations remain surface level, but sound intelligent. Feelings are analyzed rather than experienced. Partners may feel impressed, yet unseen. Power can create admiration, but admiration does not automatically create emotional safety. In many cases, emotional unavailability is not intentional cruelty. It is self-protection reinforced by success. If control has always produced results, surrendering control in relationships can feel irrational. If authority has always secured respect, stepping into emotional transparency can feel destabilizing. Power makes it possible to maintain distance while appearing fully present. It allows someone to provide materially, to lead confidently, to perform strength convincingly, all while remaining guarded internally, disconnected from deeper emotional intimacy, and reluctant to expose the parts of themselves that cannot be managed, negotiated, or controlled. Achievement can become a shield against vulnerability because accomplishment offers something that vulnerability does not: control over perception. When someone builds a reputation for excellence, productivity, and success, the world responds with admiration. That admiration becomes armor. It creates a narrative of competence and strength that feels safer than exposing uncertainty or emotional need. Achievements are tangible. They can be measured, displayed, and defended. Vulnerability, on the other hand, is invisible and unpredictable. It requires revealing fears, insecurities, and emotional wounds that cannot be managed with strategy or discipline. For many high achievers, striving began as a survival mechanism. Success may have been the way they earned approval, validation, or a sense of worth. Over time, performance becomes identity. Instead of asking, "Who am I?" the focus shifts to, "What have I accomplished?" The more impressive the resume, the less anyone questions the inner world. But when identity is built primarily on achievement, vulnerability feels threatening because it exposes the possibility that worth is not inherent, that without the titles, the recognition, or the results, there may be nothing substantial to offer. So the achievements continue to stack higher, not just as milestones, but as protective layers. In relationships, this dynamic becomes more visible. Instead of expressing emotional needs directly, achievement becomes the offering. Providing, leading, solving problems, and maintaining control can feel safer than admitting fear of rejection or abandonment. When conflict arises, it may be approached like a challenge to fix rather than a moment to connect emotionally. Achievers are trained to overcome obstacles, but vulnerability is not an obstacle to conquer. It is an experience to allow. If someone is used to winning, surrendering emotionally can feel like losing. Achievement also creates distance from introspection. Constant goals, deadlines, and growth targets leave little space for self-examination. Busyness becomes a convenient distraction from unresolved emotional patterns. It is easier to chase the next promotion than to sit with discomfort. It is easier to refine a strategy than to confront attachment wounds. The world applauds achievement loudly, but it does not reward emotional exposure in the same way. So the shield strengthens, reinforced by praise and recognition, while the vulnerable parts remain guarded behind competence, ambition, and relentless forward motion. Standards and avoidance can look almost identical on the surface, but their motivations are completely different. Standards come from clarity, Avoidance comes from fear. Standards are rooted in self-respect, emotional awareness, and an understanding of what aligns with one's values. Avoidance is rooted in discomfort, past wounds, and the desire to protect oneself from vulnerability. When someone says they have high standards, it may reflect discernment and maturity. But sometimes it is a sophisticated way of keeping people at a distance. The difference is not in what is being rejected, but in why it is being rejected. Healthy standards are consistent and principle-based. They are about compatibility, character, emotional safety, and shared values. They do not shift depending on ego or mood. Avoidance, however, often disguises itself as selectiveness. The criteria become rigid, unrealistic, or constantly evolving. No one quite qualifies. There is always something missing, something slightly off, something that justifies emotional withdrawal. The focus subtly shifts from building connection to finding flaws. Standards say, "This does not align with what I need." Avoidance says, "If I keep searching for perfection, I never have to risk being vulnerable." Another key difference lies in emotional response. When standards guide decisions, there is peace in walking away. There may be disappointment, but not panic. Avoidance, however, is often accompanied by subtle anxiety, a need to escape intimacy when it begins to deepen. The moment connection feels real, flaws become magnified. Small incompatibilities become deal breakers. Emotional closeness triggers discomfort that is then rationalized as discernment. It feels empowering to reject others before they have the opportunity to reject you. Standards require self-awareness. They demand that a person also meets the level of emotional maturity they expect from others. Avoidance rarely involves that reflection. It externalizes responsibility. The problem is always out there: the dating pool, modern culture, other people's shortcomings. There is little examination of attachment patterns or fear of closeness. Standards create healthy boundaries while remaining open to connection. Avoidance builds walls while insisting they are boundaries. The clearest distinction is this: standards protect values, while avoidance protects ego. Standards allow intimacy when alignment is present. Avoidance ensures intimacy never becomes too real. One is about intentional choice. The other is about unconscious protection disguised as preference. Ego protection disguised as high value is one of the most subtle dynamics in modern relationships. On the surface, it sounds empowering, it sounds confident, it sounds like self-worth. But there is a difference between genuine self-esteem and a defensive identity built to avoid emotional risk. When someone constantly emphasizes being high value, it can sometimes be less about intrinsic worth and more about creating a shield against rejection, criticism, or vulnerability. The language of value becomes armor. It elevates the self while quietly distancing others. True self-worth is stable. It does not need constant comparison or validation. Ego-driven high-value thinking, however, often relies on hierarchy. It frames relationships in terms of leverage, desirability, and status. Instead of asking, "Is this connection healthy and aligned?" the question becomes, "Does this person qualify for me?" That subtle shift reveals insecurity beneath the confidence. When worth is tied to superiority, intimacy becomes threatening. Emotional closeness requires equality, but ego prefers advantage. It feels safer to be admired than to be known. Ego protection also appears in the refusal to tolerate discomfort. Any disagreement may be labeled as disrespect. Any boundary from the other person may be interpreted as a challenge to authority. Instead of curiosity, there is defensiveness. Instead of reflection, there is dismissal. The identity of being high value can become so rigid that accountability feels like humiliation. Growth requires admitting imperfection, but ego resists that exposure. So the narrative is maintained. The problem is always external, never internal. There is also a performance aspect to ego-based value. It often centers around achievements, lifestyle, physical appearance, or social proof. While these attributes may indeed be impressive, they do not automatically translate into emotional depth. The more someone leans into status as proof of worth, the less space there is for vulnerability. And vulnerability is the very thing that creates real connection. When value is defined externally, it must constantly be defended. When worth is internal, it does not require comparison. Ego protection disguised as high value creates a controlled environment where admiration is welcome, but emotional exposure is limited. It prioritizes being chosen for status over being loved for authenticity. It protects pride at the expense of intimacy and maintains power at the expense of partnership. The difference between attracting attention and sustaining intimacy is the difference between performance and presence. Attention is often sparked by what is visible: appearance, confidence, status, charisma, success. It is immediate and stimulating. It thrives on novelty and intrigue. Intimacy, however, is built on what is revealed over time: emotional safety, consistency, empathy, and trust. Attention can be captured in moments. Intimacy must be cultivated through repeated emotional experiences. One is about being impressive, the other is about being accessible. Attracting attention usually relies on strengths that are externally validated. It can be strategic, intentional, even curated. The way someone speaks, dresses, presents achievements, or carries themselves can all generate admiration. There is nothing inherently wrong with that. But sustaining intimacy requires a completely different skill set. It requires the ability to listen without defensiveness, to communicate feelings clearly, and to regulate emotions during conflict. Attention focuses on creating desire. Intimacy focuses on creating safety. Desire can exist without safety, but safety cannot exist without emotional transparency. Attention is fueled by mystery. Intimacy is built on clarity. In the early stages of connection, mystery can be attractive because it allows projection. People fill in the gaps with their own fantasies and assumptions. But as closeness deepens, projection must give way to reality. Sustaining intimacy means allowing someone to see imperfections, insecurities, and vulnerabilities. It means tolerating the discomfort of being fully known. Many people are skilled at maintaining intrigue, but struggle when admiration shifts into expectation. When someone begins to require emotional consistency rather than charm, the dynamic changes. Another key difference lies in effort. Attracting attention can sometimes be passive if someone already possesses socially desirable traits. Sustaining intimacy is always active. It requires intentional communication, compromise, patience, and accountability. Attention is often strongest at the beginning, when everything feels new and exciting. Intimacy strengthens in stability, in ordinary moments in reliability. It grows when someone shows up not just when it is convenient or flattering, but when it is emotionally demanding. Attention can be won through confidence alone. Intimacy demands emotional maturity. Attention may fill a room. Intimacy fills a space between two people. One can create attraction without depth, but sustaining closeness requires the willingness to be emotionally present beyond the initial spark. In the end, all the money, status, and success in the world cannot replace emotional availability, vulnerability, or genuine connection. Attracting attention is one thing. Sustaining intimacy is another entirely. Achievements, power, and ego can all serve as shields, protecting from rejection, but also keeping love at a distance. High standards, when rooted in avoidance or fear, can block the very closeness we crave. True fulfillment comes not from admiration, but from the courage to be seen, to be felt, and to feel in return. Success may open doors, but emotional depth is what keeps someone truly close. At the heart of every meaningful relationship is authenticity, empathy, and the willingness to risk vulnerability. Because love does not reward performance, it rewards presence.